recording as well. No. Okay. Ah.
Perfect. That's great. Nice. Well, welcome everyone. And yeah, great to also see we've got someone from Portugal as well. So we've got a little sort of pan-European group today, which is nice. As Marlene said, yeah, part of the workshop today, so we're going to be focusing on how we embed inclusivity into kind of the work that you're working on, whether that's in your organization, in the product or service you're providing, or the programs that you're delivering. So we have a focus obviously on kind of innovation, startups and programs. But really what we'll do is we'll kind of dive into the link around climate change and inequalities, and how this kind of manifests itself in the world today. And then we'll pivot to look at really practical kind of tangible ways that you can start to embed this into the work you do. So one of the aims I like to have is for people to take away something practical they can do right away, and really feel like, they have an idea of something that would work for their organization. As Marlene said, I'm like, this is not a huge group today, so I'm very happy to, yeah, for it to be a conversation style. So if you have anything you'd like to say, you can raise your hand and we can stop at any point. Or similarly, if you want to make any contributions in the chat, that would be great. It is a workshop where we do have points of discussion, points of kind of, yeah, where you can kind of give ideas or give also your experience in there. And that, makes the workshop more exciting and kind of dynamic if you can, contribute and give some of your own personal experience. So if that's possible, that would be great. If you've got the bandwidth of your internet, please feel free to put your face to your name. If you need to take a bathroom break or grab a cup of tea or coffee, I've got a little tea now, do feel free to do that at any time. And as Marlene said, the workshop will be recorded and also all the slides afterwards will be shared. So don't worry about kind of writing anything down or any of the links or anything. They will be shared in the aftermath. So the agenda for today's workshop, we're going to be working to about an hour and a half today, hopefully maybe even finishing a little bit earlier. But as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the business case for DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, sorry. So looking really at why it's important, why it's something you need to care about, the links with kind of climate change, and kind of inequalities. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the practical ways to dive into that in specific areas, with a focus on kind of building a diverse team, strengthening products and services, and communications and marketing. Just to say, all of this, all of our work that we do is under Creative Commons, which is a kind of way of working in terms of using content. So if this is something you'd like to replicate, you're welcome to do that as long as you kind of follow the guidelines here, and make sure that you kind of attribute us, but all the information is in this slide here. So just before we get started, I wanted to ask if there's any questions that people are coming to the session with today, anything they want to really cover, or any topics they want to dive into, so that we can try to put that in throughout the workshop. I'll pause for a second there. Just going to check the chat. Hi, Pablo. Nice to have you. Got a lot of rural focus. Maybe we can also touch a little bit on that as well and look at some of the specificities around kind of working with rural communities. Any other questions, thoughts people are coming with today? Nope. Okay, perfect. As I mentioned, anything that comes up, feel free to put it in the chat. Um, I am, however, going to get you to get your brains thinking a little bit, get us kind of thinking about the topic a little bit. So I've got a couple of pop quiz questions to get us started. I don't have any prizes, unfortunately, but you can have the joy of knowing you were right, or winning this early on in the day. So question to get us started today. What is the percentage of women inventors in Europe as of 2025? What do we think the percentage would be? Any thoughts? You can put them in the chat or you can speak out loud. Let me check. Petra saying 20%. Okay, nice. Any other thoughts? Do we think it's higher, lower? 15% from Elisa. Okay. Any others? 30%, lower than that? Yeah. So according to the Commission, it's only sitting at around 9% of inventors in Europe. Unfortunately, we don't have amazing statistics on other kind of underrepresented groups. So things like ethnic or racial minorities, rural also groups. But yeah, in terms of gender, we do see a real kind of lack of pipeline of women inventors coming through, which I think is a nice kind of term to broadened from just innovators or startup founders, so just a bit lower than what we suggested. And then in terms of thinking about kind of climate change as a whole and this is a report from Oxfam, which is very interesting to look at. But what do we think? The richest 1% of the world emit as much emissions as the poorest what percentage? What do we think? Any guesses there? Do we think it's no 60%? Okay, good guess. Yeah. Any others? 80. Rebecca's going high. Yeah. So according to Oxfam, it's around 66%. So Pedro, you were correct, just about correct on that one there. It's quite an interesting study. I would recommend having a look at it. And they also did a more updated one recently that looked at what point in the year do the 1% kind of surpass this other 66% in terms of their emissions. And I think it's like in February or something. So it's like very early on in the year that we see this real inequity in terms of who emits the most emissions compared to who doesn't. And then finally, last question. In 2024, what percentage of venture capital, VC funding, funded startups in Europe had all women founder teams? So not including co-founder, but just all women. What do we think the percentage is there? Again, thoughts in the chat. 5%, 5%, okay. Any others? 2%, Adriana, yeah. Yeah, I think we're sitting more on that one. 2.3% was the latest stats from 2024. And actually, teams with at least one woman on the co-founding team saw a further 14.1% investment, but obviously nowhere near kind of 50%. And I have to say, Europe is actually really lagging in terms of or actually the Western kind of sphere is the US as well is very lacking behind in terms of VC funding. We see the number jump to around, I think around 10% in Latin America, and 15% in Africa. So yeah, a lot of work to be done in this space. So I hope that kind of has, yeah, just got your brains thinking a little bit about the stats and thinking a little bit around this topic. So when we talk about inclusivity, we often talk about these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes justice is also thrown in there as well. But when we want to talk about climate innovation or entrepreneurship, we want to see inclusivity going beyond just representation. So we don't just mean having people in spaces, having kind of different types of innovators in different programs, but we want to see how they're meaningfully involved. So do they have decision making? Is there equitable opportunities for them? Are we thinking also about kind of how the solutions are then impacting different communities? When we think about kind of young people or rural communities in that way. I like this stat from or this quote, sorry, from Verna Myers, where she says diversity is being invited to the dance and inclusion is being asked to dance. So it's that kind of more kind of action orientated or different approaches there. Um, when we talk about kind of different groups, obviously there is a definition of, or there are different definitions that can be used to talk about groups who are at risk. And one of the ways that we define that is through climate-related risks. So different organizations will base these on maybe health risks or social impacts, kind of more broadly. But at Climate-KIC, we tend to use the term at risk to define those who are most impacted by the climate crisis. As you can see, this is quite a long list of people who are impacted in different ways. And I really liked on the right, I found this really nice graph, just looking at kind of the wheel of social identity and the idea that all these different aspects of who you are will allow you to have less or more kind of access to capital, to be prepared for the climate crisis, to have the ability to move, for example, or the ability to adapt or mitigate. These will all be kind of impacted by these different identities that you have. Every context will be different. So if you are based in Italy, for example, you'll have a different kind of set of groups that are at risk compared to Slovenia or in Brazil, for example. So what's really nice is if you can spend some time mapping your own at-risk groups about the local context you're in and the people you're working with to try and kind of understand what who do we have in our stakeholder group. And another big thing to say is that these identities will intersect as well. So you'll have, if you're from a poorer background and you're also a person living with a disability, you will have more barriers to accessing care or support than you will be if you're in a kind of higher income category. So thinking about those intersections as well. So when we talk about climate change and inequality, as I mentioned with that statistic at the start, we do see a real disproportionate kind of breakdown of emissions on a global level. So the biggest emitters often face the least climate burden. So this kind of, if we look at it from a kind of rich income, poor income approach, we see that kind of the richest 1% emit, as we mentioned, kind of the same as around 50% or just slightly higher of the poorest in the world. We also see that on a kind of country scale. So there's not amazing terms for this, but if you think about the kind of global north or countries that are kind of in the kind of northern hemisphere, Europe, the US, tend to also emit the highest compared to countries that are in the global south. So we have this inequity on a kind of global scale. But then when you actually look at kind of in country or start to think about different communities, you also see this kind of circle, kind of difficult circle where disadvantaged groups will suffer when there is floods, when there is droughts, when they're, trying to adapt to extreme heat. And they will also struggle to then kind of recover from that as well. So it kind of widens this inequality gap. So kind of creates wider sort of inequalities within countries and within communities. One of the examples that we found, I think a lot of people in Europe, maybe even worldwide, will remember the kind of images from the Valencian floods in 2024. where we saw actually that a lot of the elderly and gig workers were some of the hardest hit. So delivery drivers, a lot of them were either waiting in car parks or, it was early on in the day, so waiting to start their shifts. So we're kind of stuck in difficult situations. And also with the elderly trying to leave buildings, and also with people in wheelchairs as well. So kind of having real risk to their lives immediately. And we've also seen also that some of the poorer communities have struggled to kind of clean up and have their kind of lives rebuilt as quicker than others. So just an example to think about there. I wanted to pivot slightly and start to think about kind of gender inequality in the startup and innovation world, and think about it more in terms of workplace. And I thought this was a really nice kind of short advertisement from International Women's Day last year. So I'm going to try and play it. Hopefully you can hear it.
Can you repeat that question?
Have you ever been asked to just smile and look pretty, or smile and just say nothing in a meeting with a customer?
No.
Do you think that your looks helped you getting promoted or moving up to your current position? Looking so good? By the way,
Yeah.
I do love the shoes. Are these designer, or do you have a particular brand that you really like? Do your hormones sometimes get in the way?
Hormones, I don't know.
I see that it's a bit of an awkward question, but
Do you sometimes wonder whether you've been chosen for this position because you're a man?
No, not because I was a man.
How do you handle in your job being assertive without being perceived as aggressive or bitchy?
that's a question that I find it very hard to relate to,
Why?
because it's not a situation I've been in.
What do you think about the line of questioning so far?
I see where you're going.
Where's that?
Showing the difference in what you perceive what you experience as a man versus as a woman.
It really, really, really feels uncomfortable, and I also feel it in my body.
When hearing these things still happen, it made me also feel that, hey, maybe I am more privileged than I thought I was.
Do you think this world is ready for your 10-year-old daughter to be treated with the same equality as a 10-year-old son?
This is something that keeps me up, makes me worry sometimes. So it's real when it's about my own daughter. I think the only thing I can do is to prepare for the real world. And it's really hard. People are so difficult for each other sometimes.
I wish every female leader to be safe and not confronted with these questions.
If you observe something, you have to step in. You can't just wait for someone else to step in or to solve something. This is a responsibility we all have.
Okay, I thought it was a really great advertisement to kind of showcase the experiences of women that they have in kind of the workplace, and obviously very interesting to see their kind of male colleagues' reactions to how they were questioned, and many of them saying they felt it in their body. That was just a nice demonstration of it. So pivoting a little bit to talk about bias in the startup world, one of the areas we know a lot about in terms of bias is gender, and looking at kind of women's experiences in the startup and innovation world. As we mentioned before, we talked around the kind of this percentage of VC investment to women-founded startups. It's significantly lower. I mean, it's very, I would say, pitifully low in terms of it sits between this 1% to 5% worldwide. In Europe, sitting around 2%, which is nowhere near kind of equality at all for the funding that needs to go there. We also see it in terms of how that actually works in the pitching process. So when women founders go into pitching situations with their investors, they are asked to spend 50% more time on their traction, ask more questions around the technicalities, around the kind of problem solving, rather than looking at the future and what they would like to achieve compared to their male counterparts. There was an interesting study from the UK that showed that women founders feel they are 81% less likely to be confident they can access funding. So imagine what that kind of does to you when you go into these meetings, that you feel you're already at a disadvantage, and what that means. And actually on the right, this was a quote from one of our startups based in the Netherlands, who expressed this experience that she had. She's the technical expert in her area, and that she had kind of pitched her idea to investors. And simultaneously, her colleague had as well, our chief financial officer, and she received so many more questions around the technical aspects and her expertise and whether she understood the very kind of technical work that she was doing, and her CFO experienced none. So it's just a kind of example of kind of the biases that women face in this startup world. But what's also interesting is that there are reports that show that women entrepreneurs in general tend to be more focused on ESG aspects more broadly. They tend to think, around their kind of carbon footprint, their social impact, even if their product is not deliberately like targeting these areas. So, quite interesting to think about, even if you're not working directly with climate or social impact startups. This is one of my favorite slides. But what's really interesting is that despite the fact that VC funding is so low, and that funding overall to women startups is nowhere near it used to be, in general, startups that are founded or co-funded by women tend to actually make more money in the long run, and they tend to last longer. They tend to grow also at a higher rate. So despite the fact that they're not getting as much funding, they do actually make more money in the long run. And this also has been kind of updated more recently, and shows a similar kind of stat there. So I wanted to also just broaden out, because obviously, as I mentioned, we do have a lot of statistics around gender equality, but I know that many of you are working beyond just looking at kind of women's empowerment and looking maybe at youth, other underrepresented groups, and bringing them in. We are at a really interesting point where the concept or the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion has been attacked, I would say. We've seen a lot of pushback from companies letting go of their departments, moving away from having to have it as a requirement. We're actually also hearing that, especially in the US, that anyone who even mentions this is kind of blacklisted from certain things, particularly in VC funding. But actually, it is a really important concept, and the idea of it can sometimes seem complicated, but in a really practical sense, we understand that diversity fuels innovation. There are lots of statistics that show this. You have a diverse team, you tend to problem solve better. We also see that diverse perspectives in the climate space actually lead to more localized and creative responses. If you're bringing in the communities that you're working with really substantially, your solution is going to be stronger, your programs are going to be better, the services you offer are going to be better in the long run. And also, you're going to start to actually think about those systemic barriers and enabling these at-risk groups to thrive. It's not something that will go away. If you don't target it, it will still continue. And we know that on an overall kind of global scale, that if we don't bring groups along with us and actually work with them and incorporate their knowledge, we might have climate solutions, but only for a small group of people. So this is really, really important. And also in terms of the workplace, we've actually seen a lot of progress focusing on kind of these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you think about paid parental leave, whether that's maternity, paternity, or broader kind of leave for caregivers, any of the disability acts that you have in your own countries have been fought for by actors who want to see more inclusion and more equality for people with different disabilities. any kind of anti-harassment laws, also fought for the right to wear religious clothing as well, and even things also, flexible working provisions if you have caring responsibilities or you're studying alongside your work, even kind of working from home. We all saw that was, enabled during COVID. Having these things pushed for allows different groups to be able to participate in the workforce more equally and better and in a better way. As I mentioned before, it makes sense. You have a diverse group that kind of fuels innovation. It also offers kind of peer-to-peer learning opportunities. If you have people from different backgrounds, different experiences, they can exchange and learn from each other. And this is overall a real strength for different businesses to have. We also see that customers also want to see this diversity reflected in the products they put their money in. So whether it's that they want to see their own communities reflected in what they're buying, or generally see that that's something that's kind of time and time again pushed for. And also investors, although I did mention that the kind of VC side of things is very low in itself, has a lot of issues, we do also see that investors are starting to create funds directly for women-founded groups, those from different ethnicity or racial backgrounds, from those who maybe didn't go to university, different educational pathways. Seeing investors try to tap into this, untapped potential to find different solutions to invest in. So important to think about that. I'm going to pause for a second to see if there are any questions, any reflections so far before we jump into the second half. Or has anyone had any experience with any of this and would like to share anything? No. Okay, no worries. I'll keep going. There's a couple more points as we go on for discussion, so hopefully we can spark some interest there. So as I mentioned before, we're going to focus in on kind of 3 areas today, and areas that you can start to engage these issues and actually put them into practical elements that you can take away and work on. So the first one is building and retaining diverse teams. Sounds like the most obvious. If you have those diverse people internally, you're going to see that innovation and creativity spark and see able to, kind of broaden your horizons that way. We're going to look at the strengthening of products, services, and programs, because I know we have a mixture of different types of organizations in the room today. So looking at how you can embed that through those different processes. And looking at the approach to communications and marketing, so how you can actually advertise the work that you do in more of an inclusive and broader way. We'll talk a little bit about also investors and some of the ways that you can also kind of look at it that way, but that's more towards the end, so we'll do that. So let's start looking at building a diverse team. So as I mentioned before, why is it important? But actually we see, beyond just it being a good thing to do and having diverse people and diverse perspectives in your organization, there are studies that show that companies with a diverse workforce are 35% more likely to experience greater financial returns, i.e. you make more money if you have more diverse views inside and diverse kind of colleagues. Also, our aims to boost creativity and learning opportunities. And we're also seeing that, candidates also want to see this diversity coming into companies. A lot of younger people, this is also kind of coming through from, want to see a company that they're going to be diverse, be thinking about, plans for how to make that diverse. And actually, a study showed that 1 in 3 candidates will not apply to a company if they don't think that it looks diverse enough. So they're not even going for a role in that space. So what can you actually do? So practical approaches to doing this, thinking about the hiring process, using neutral language in job postings. I know this is really varied across different languages. I'd also be curious to hear how it is in Slovenian, for example, or in Portuguese. But I spoke to one of our startups who is based in a Spanish-speaking country, and they were saying that sometimes the default is to use male language. So trying to find a way around that to make it more neutral, so it isn't appealing to one group or another. Thinking about your must-haves to your nice-to-haves. So, for example, if you're hiring a role in operations, is it someone that really needs to have like a traditional kind of bachelor's and master's degree, for example? Could it be someone who has more experience in different ways? Really looking at what you're kind of asking in terms of the requirements, and thinking about what do you really need for this role versus what is a nice to have, because then you'll maybe get kind of varied candidates who have different experience coming in that way. Listing the salary on the job advertisement, this is a really big one. So there are lots of studies that show that women, and also those from kind of ethnic or racial minorities, tend to pitch themselves lower when they come into a role than their kind of male or white counterparts. So if you're advertising a role, even if you can't advertise the specific kind of salary itself, but you can do a range. This really helps to be able to kind of root out any inequality that comes from someone having to state their own salary that way. Similarly, if you can refrain from asking about previous salaries and expectations, again, this also allows there to be kind of less burden on the candidate to provide this themselves, because we do see kind of different approaches to pitching salary if you're particularly in the gender aspect there. Blind screening of CVs is another one. So if you are often what we will suggest is that you have a first page or a kind of a form where you have kind of people's name, age, gender, whatever in there, and then their cover letter separately, and you can always assign them a number or assign them a kind of a code or something, and have people read their cover letters first before looking at any of their demographic data. And this is just that we all have biases that kind of come out. If anyone ever applies to a role and they're Scottish, because I'm Scottish, I get really excited and I think, oh my God, and it kind of clouds your judgment a little bit. I can imagine it happens as well in different places. So try to kind of, you can do that manually or build that into your hiring approach. Ensuring diversity in interview panel. I know this is sometimes difficult, especially also if you're a company that's trying to diversify and you don't have that there. But really trying to look at who you're putting up for different interview panels, and if you can maybe have like different groups of people kind of evaluating one, that's also a good way to do it. Another way, this is a slightly more, I don't know if I would say controversial, but I've had some interesting feedback on this, but having a first round of interview with a particular group of candidates. So say, for example, you do really want to hire a CTO that's a woman, do your first round of interviews with just the women who've managed to make it through. Obviously, if you don't find who you're looking for, you broaden it out in that sense. But it's a nice way to maybe interview people who maybe have different experience, or who, you maybe wouldn't have normally given an interview with. Give them a chance to kind of showcase their work and their experience that way. And then also diversifying where you advertise your jobs. I've linked all these different areas here, but actually going out to different communities, different groups, particularly those you're looking to hire from, and spending time and maybe even a little bit of money to advertise with them is really worth it in the long run to get the candidates you're looking for. Pivoting now to internal policies. So one of the big ways, and this may differ depending on if you're a small organization or a bigger one, but thinking about implementing equitable parental leave policies. I know that each country will have really different mandatory levels here, but actually offering kind of equitable leave for both the mother or the birthing person and then also their partner as well. Studies show that this is one of the biggest ways to allow partners to have equity and also for women to get back into the workforce easily because they'll have their partner also taking on a bit of the burden of childcare in the first year. Beyond this, also thinking about how you can offer flexible working policies. Are you allowing people to, take time to maybe pick up children from school or to do their caring responsibilities or to travel to and from work? That's really a kind of way to offer more flexibility and retain staff rather than being rigid with timings. And also leading by example. So if you're in kind of senior management or leadership, it's really important that you also take these opportunities to actually do this and that staff can see that they're allowed to and see kind of leading by example on these policies. Having clear anti-harassment policies, probably all of you will have this, but I've had in the past some small startups who've come to me and said, oh, we had an issue happen and we didn't have a policy in place and it was really difficult to work through and it was, it caused a lot of problems. So having something clear, a template that you can have someone sign as they join your organization or have, really clear when they are hired, it means that when something if something unfortunately does happen, it's already there and you don't have to think about it in the moment. Thinking about different religious festivals or festive days in general. If you have public holidays, you can also allow people to take them maybe at different times. It's always interesting that, if you are living in a country that celebrates Christmas, but you don't, and you celebrate Eid or Hanukkah, you don't get to take those, off. So maybe offering that as a flexibility there. Even also with public holidays as well, allowing that is a real policy that people like. And then the last two are kind of thinking around how do you actually upskill and maybe enable the colleagues you already have to broaden their skills and actually maybe promote from within. So I know this is quite common at big tech companies who, if they'll have people working for them in kind of customer support service roles or maybe kind of executive assistants, they can often offer boot camps to become coders, to become kind of software engineers, and that is a real way to keep people and kind of also, someone who knows your organization, but kind of broadening the horizons and kind of giving opportunities that maybe they didn't have in more formal education to do it that way. So just some things to think about. I wanted to give a case study. So this is one of our startups we work with in another program. So Cyclo are a startup in Colombia who offer an app and system for reusable food packaging. And when they were writing their kind of job applications or job descriptions, they realized that they were using it from this male perspective, as I mentioned before. So they tried to think about how they could actually communicate this a bit more universally. It's a very small thing to do, but really kind of broadens out and shows that they're committed to hiring more diverse people. So something small that you can do that you can integrate into your hiring process to broaden out who you would attract. I also wanted to highlight another startup from one of our programs in Nairobi, Kenya. So this is Deed Technologies, and they specialize in refurbishing secondhand computers with a focus on affordability and quality. So kind of giving those computers to communities who maybe don't have access or do it for a better price. And they actually they did this kind of upskilling approach, so created pathways for technical training for maybe staff that were supporting them in their cleaning areas or also in their admin areas, to then have the opportunity to learn how to work on computers and repairing them in this kind of circular fashion. And yeah, it was a nice way of kind of upskilling who they've got internally to work on that. I wanted to just also briefly mention, we don't have a huge amount of time to go into this, but in terms of obviously there's a huge area around disabilities and offering kind of accommodations for people who are either internally working for you or coming into your programs. So I found this really nice graphic on the left-hand side that talks about the different ways that you could think about accommodations. So you can have a look at that after. But also on the right, I just wanted to highlight some really practical ways you can embed or think about accessibility for people with disabilities. So a big one is obviously if you have an office or you're running events or kind of even if you're doing interviews with people, thinking about kind of a space that has ramps or elevators for those who maybe need to take advantage of that to get into your building. And then also thinking about some software and tech that can be really useful for those who maybe have sight impairment or hearing impairment. So on the right, I've got some links to screen readers that are really useful, and also a really interesting kind of AI-powered sign language interpretation, which is a really nice application of AI in the world of how it's being used. So have a look at those another time to see if it's something. A lot of them are free, to be honest, as well. So something you could offer at even the interview stage to new candidates. I wanted to pause for a little bit of discussion. I'm just gonna see the chats. So reflecting on these actions, which one would you think would be the easiest to implement for your organization and why? What's something you could take away today and start to implement? I'll pause to see if anyone has any thoughts. Or if there's any that people are doing that I didn't mention, any other ideas that people want to share in the group. Nope. That's okay. Any thoughts? Again, you can put them in the chat throughout, or feel free to shout out. I'll keep going. So, oh, sorry, maybe I've got somebody in the chat. Let me check. Do I have examples of diversity-specific innovation initiatives, hubs, and accelerators? Yeah, Pedro, do you mean like in terms of programs and different ways that way? Do you want to maybe just give broaden out what you were asking, Pedro? Or Piedar, sorry. So in terms of programs, we actually are going to talk about programs a bit later, actually. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the ways that, yeah, in terms of a really basic thing is actually to run a specific accelerator or incubator for a specific group. So have really targeted, for example, if you're trying to reach youth participants, run an accelerator and incubator that's for that. Also similarly with women, because one of the biggest things is also just having funding and for those particular groups. So if you're focusing in on that, that's a really nice way to do it. We'll talk a little bit later actually about programs and services in this one. So maybe that'll answer some of your questions that you have there. I hope
Apologies.
that makes sense.
My computer wasn't able to connect, but sorry to interrupt. Just
go ahead.
We've been looking at specifically at entrepreneurship and neurodiversity.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
And I was just wondering if you had any examples anywhere in Europe. And apologies, I haven't enough of bandwidth for video.
No worries. No, that's all good. I actually do have an example, not of an innovation, but of a company who did it, case study. I can include it afterwards, in my notes. But it's a really good one, actually. I think for those with neurodiversity, there is a lot of focus on different approaches to learning, or so having different types of learning. So whether it's kind of in these kind of webinars where people have to concentrate for a long time, or having short bursts of learning opportunities, having them spoken or written down. I think given that neurodiversity is such a broad term, it's good to offer different approaches to learning in that way, and also to offer kind of an open forum at the start where participants themselves can tell you like what their needs are and what their kind of approaches that we'd need. So if they're doing kind of group work, do they need it to be in a smaller group? Would they prefer to work on their own, or would they prefer to be in a bigger group? I think kind of opening that dialogue is a good way to start. But I can share some links afterwards as well, on specifically on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. And I'm just checking the chat. Adriana saying, I work in a department that has an academic incubator, which takes up most of my time. Do you have any best practices for those who work with small organization startups? How can we help them to keep these issues in mind? Yeah. We'll do, again, in this area here, we'll talk a little bit about programs and stuff. But in terms of just like overall framing, so when we work with our startups, one of the biggest things they say to us is like, we don't have time to do this. And I get it, there's a lot of other things that they have their minds on. But I think by emphasizing that these are all really small things that can be changed in the processes. I always call it kind of like the habits or habitual way of thinking. So if you change your hiring process once and it becomes like the process, then you don't need to think about it. It's just the way that you do it. Or when you think about your product development, what it tends to do is if you do this at the start and as you build and grow, those won't become issues later on that are harder to retrofit as you grow. So for example, if you're an organization that is looking to hire and you're not really thinking about kind of diversity, and then you end up with like 15 all men, sorry, in one thing, it becomes harder and harder to hire more women, because a potential candidate will look at your website and think, oh, this maybe isn't the place for me, or this isn't a spot where I'll be respected. Whereas if you'd started to think about that early on, maybe that would have kind of diversified, and as you've grown, it creates better pipelines for candidates. But we'll jump into the programs area and talk about that as well. I hope that makes sense. So as I mentioned before, teams that are diverse, we thought about kind of integrating the teams, but they actually work faster and are kind of cognitively diverse. And this means that when companies have this, they tend to be 1.7 times more likely to be innovation leaders in their own space. So they're able to adapt, think quickly, think creatively, and solve problems in a better way. And obviously, that's something that's really valuable when you're designing products, designing services. You want to be able to adapt, to iterate, to think quickly, also because you don't often have a lot of time or a lot of funding to be able to work on this. One of the interesting ways of thinking is to actually design for the margins, and that will benefit the majority. So to actually think about those who will use your product or have specific needs for your product, and design for them, and then that will actually benefit the majority because they will already be using it in a way that's kind of your test case. So actually baking that into your process and approach works. And also doing testing with diverse groups upfront allows there to be it surfaces any unanticipated design flaws early. So again, going back to how do you get your startups to think about this? This is something that you can say to them, this will cost you money and effort in the long run if you do not test and think about these groups. And also it just opens up a broader customer base and service for them to work with. And I wanted to use the example on the right here, which I think many of us will remember, the big kind of PPE outfits during COVID. And there was an interesting study in the UK that showed that quite a lot of the PPE did not actually fit the women well. And you saw situations of them having to sort of like tie them or figure out ways that they would fit their bodies well. And obviously during that time, that was a part of their, quite a scary thing to have your health was at online. These health workers were having to put on stuff that didn't fit them. And that's because the traditional PPE is only measured on a male body, not on a woman's body. So really like the process of designing that isn't inclusive and has real life consequences in that way. So when we're thinking about strengthening products and services, and again, this is maybe something you can think about passing on to your startups themselves, what are ways that you can actually embed this practically? So the team that's actually running the testing, have them be diverse themselves and have them be able to spot some of the issues that you're having. So not just in your wider organization, but in the testing group as well. Recruiting representative groups to test your product or service. So this is somewhere you can partner with community groups or think about different kind of outreach in the communities you're working on to have them be part of the testing and give feedback that's taken on board. To remember that when you're asking anyone to give their time to actually offer some sort of compensation, whether that's even just a lunch, or you're actually able to maybe offer some vouchers or something that people are giving up their time, even if it's not in a kind of consultancy or paid way, but actually giving up their time to give you feedback on your product, and that is very useful. So think about how you can compensate them for that. Conducting accessibility testing. So if you have something like an app or a physical service, you might want to test it with people who have hearing or sight impairment, or if you have a physical disability as well. So important to test it with those people there. Testing in diverse contexts. So again, if you have something that needs to be used on the go, if you have like an app that's used for farmers to track they're looking at different crops approaches, have they actually tried it in the field rather than just in a lab? Doing that kind of upfront is really important. And then offering testing in different languages. Many of you will be working across different communities, maybe even in communities that have local languages. Can you offer it there to ensure that you're getting the best feedback possible on their products? I wanted to highlight one of our an example from another project we work on in the New European Bauhaus area of work. So this is a collective that have a social enterprise that creates sustainable and inclusive play areas for children with neurodiversity in Barcelona. So children, as we were talking about, people with neurodiversity have different needs, different ways of playing or working or interacting with the world. So they wanted to create play areas that actually worked for those children and that they wanted to use. So one of the nice ways they did this is by actually bringing the children and families in when they have these kind of prototypes to have them test it and see how it works, and then iterate from that, so that the actual endpoint is something that the children would want to use. It sounds really basic and straightforward, but when you're working fast and with kind of tight deadlines, it can seem like an extra thing to do, but really, really important. And then I also wanted to highlight another startup from one of our programs. They're called SEOS Energy, and they kind of looked at, they found that their end user, they work with kind of sort of energy, they're an energy supplier. They sit as a kind of in between kind of energy suppliers and households in Colombia. And they saw that there was men were usually making the kind of household financial decisions in that was kind of the challenge that they had, but they really wanted to broaden out their customer base. So they did some testing with some of their women customers, and many of them said that if they kind of gave them a special rate, they would join. And so they actually saw a real shift in the approach, and saw kind of a lot of the women kind of took advantage of this and wanted to push for it. So they saw a kind of increase in their women as a customer base and the untapped potential there. for them to have. So another way to think about broadening who your customer base is. And maybe, and this is going on to looking at programs. So maybe I'm just going to pause because I think there's a question in the chat, or let me check. Yeah, Adriana, perfect. So many of you will be running actual programs for your startups or innovators you're working with. So thinking about ways you can embed this. So looking at your panel and selection criteria. So ensuring that, you know, anyone who's judging or being kind of a jury for the program or prize you're working on, that you have diversity there of the experience. Reviewing the criteria to make sure that you're not favoring one group over the other. I often say it's good to have multiple people review criteria before it goes out, just a sense check that it feels good in that way. Thinking about your kind of caring responsibilities. So if you're running programs, you know, are you thinking about the timings of these, not scheduling during childcare kind of pickups or drop-offs? If you're actually running events, particularly for women, are you actually offering childcare or breastfeeding facilities at the events that you're operating, or in physical, the physical in-person workshops? Having feedback on programs. So again, as you mentioned, like taking the time at the end of programs to get feedback on these areas, particularly maybe from groups you want to expand into, and then use them to improve on the program design. And then thinking about, as I mentioned before, particular funding for particular groups. So running an accelerator or incubator targeting the group that you're looking to expand into, and also thinking about specific training for different entrepreneurs. So if you're working with young people, for example, they might not have as much experience with pitching or feeling confident in that area. So offering training specifically for that. Or if you're working with people from a rural background, maybe they don't have as much kind of business experience, or they've come from a different pathway. So how do you kind of assess their needs and then offer specific training tailored to them? So that's a nice way to do it. And then I wanted to highlight, so this is another one of our kind of programs. They run innovation programs across Ireland, Alpha, and after one of their programs, they offered questionnaires and asked for feedback on what could be improved. And one of the big things was that many of their startups were doing the program alongside traditional jobs. And so they weren't able to often make the sessions that were Monday to Friday in the working hours. So actually, could they offer some sessions on a Saturday morning to allow those with the full-time jobs, or, you know, with childcare, to have a bit more flexibility to join? So they integrated that into the next iteration of their program. So yeah, a good way to show how they can have those feedback acted on. I wanted to pause for reflection. So just wanted to see if you've ever done any testing with groups. So this can be if you're working on a product or service, or if you've ever done any, I guess, survey or reflection with the groups you're working with, and how did that work? I'll pause there.
Hello, it's Heather here again.
Go ahead, Heather.
It's interesting because we've been running some programs or working with the research community, but in terms of helping them with entrepreneurship, they're so busy with their research. Sometimes we struggle to get their time. So we've started to identify Friday as a good day, and Friday afternoon as a good time, and even considering running very bite-sized sessions, maximum 1 hour, ideally 45 minutes, and considering maybe even running some on an evening, maybe from 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock, because they have a real genuine interest, but to accommodate them. And it's interesting to work on the basis where you're focused on dropping the seeds of possibility. It's almost like not a full program, but you're helping to drop the seeds of possibility that hopefully some of which will grow further later.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And like, it's such a small thing, right? To think about the week and think about, okay, when are the touch points that we can have those? And yeah, I think people do often want to give their time, but they don't have the space to do it. So yeah, really great that you were thinking about, okay, Friday afternoons or the evenings is a good point for that. Yeah, agree. Thank you. Let me check the chat. Rina saying, wondering if there's anyone interested in cooperating to implement DE&I principles to SMEs. Yeah, great. Great to see some coordination going on and ideas in the chat. Anyone else want to give their thoughts on this area so far? I wonder if there's anyone who's working. I know a lot of people are working with the rural community and areas. Is there anything that you've done differently or thought about in your programs to allow them to participate more equally or seen kind of uptake more in a better way?
Sorry, Heather, back to you again. We have a case study where we've been running part of a European project called AgriNext. We've been running an incubator around farm diversification.
Yeah.
So how we run it is it runs 2 sessions per month.
Yeah.
And like that, what we do is on the Monday of the week, we have 1 session, which is a full Friday.
Yeah.
But on the Monday of that week, in the evening, we have a session for an hour and a half, which is almost like bringing them into tune with what is happening during the day on the Friday.
Yeah. Okay.
And it seems to have worked really well. And, I can't claim that it was I came up with the design of it, but the individual that had came up with the design of it obviously had a lot of experience of dealing with the rural community.
Yeah. Yeah, so you had to think about kind of the timings or when people are working and different things, and that seemed to be a good pattern, the Friday and then the Monday reflection.
Well, the Friday brings the Monday. It's the Monday at the start of the week, so that brings them into tune with what's going to happen on the Friday.
Yeah,
and it happens once a month.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. Thank you. Marina, do you want to go next?
So I have a question for Taylor, actually. I was wondering, how do you make businesses like you seriously, let's say, when you put the program or the incubator as your last priority?
So in terms of, sorry, your volume was a little bit low, but just you said, how do you
how do you make business? Do you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Great. So I was wondering, how do you make businesses take you seriously when you put the implementation of day principles for them following a day strategy, whatever he's working on? I didn't fully follow up with that. And if you put it as the last priority, like Friday evening, or because for me it has worked differently when I work with rural communities. I'm like, this is for you. This is for your competitive advantage. This is what you need to do. So you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I was wondering, like, how it works. In which countries Peter? I'm in Greece.
So I'm based in Ireland, and I have learned the difficult way not to try and persuade people that they should have a business. So the approach I take now is get small pieces of information and I spread them out to a wide community. And the people that are interested seem to follow. And the people, let me clarify. I think a lot of people are interested, but really what you're talking about, I think, is the people who are committed.
Yeah.
And the approach I've been taking is small bite sizes, stay in contact with them. Don't feel rejected if they don't contact you, because sometimes very recently, I got a phone call from somebody, and he said to me, he said, I don't know if you remember me or not. He said, but we spoke about 8 years ago. And I was talking, he said, about setting up a brewery in a rural, on a farm. And he said, our conversation stuck with me. He said, but I wasn't ready to do anything. And I do remember the guy and his business. But so now we're re-engaging again. But
Yeah.
There isn't, I think if you try and think, and that's why I've started to call what we do pathfinding rather than a program.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship is very personal. And I think the best thing you can try and do is have a range of services or, but look, I can put my email address on chat and feel free to connect with me, but there isn't a magic wand. I think I grew up in a rural environment. I then worked in a corporate world, so I'm bringing all aspects to it. I think the geography of innovation is changing, and I've noticed that in the last couple of years. So what I see in rural environments now, I haven't seen 10 years ago. I haven't seen 5 years ago. There's a lot more activity. You have a picture on your slide there of wind turbines. If we looked at a slide probably 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the idea of energy generation was going to be at a central point and distributed back out. But we're now in a case where we're doing it in small cases. So I have an unhealthy bias that we are moving towards more distributed innovation. And it'll take a while, but it is happening.
Yeah.
So
no, I think, I was just gonna, I 100% agree. I think with go ahead, Marina, sorry.
What I was trying to say is that I'm following a completely different strategy, like focusing on early adopters. And I'm going there, and what I offer is like a service for videoing for their marketing and to showcase what they're doing in terms of sustainability, because these people are also really like sustainable in 90% of the cases that I have interviewed. Or like I did one of the first researches here in Greece in small and medium business on how they can implement ESG on their business model. So what I've seen is that going to committed people and then showing the results to the others makes the others want to follow up, not the other way around. Because I'm also Gen Z, and honestly, I don't have the patience to do what you're saying. That's why I was asking, to chase them and to have different services and to try to convince them. I was like, no. I'm not really ready to their adaptive. So like the others find it appealing and I don't know, like.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, I think to pull together two threads that both of you said. So I think offering like bite-sized, easy to understand actions, like in terms of just like practical approaches that people can take, I think is really, really good, and offering it in small doses for them. So like not overwhelming them with everything, but having these kind of like touch points that you can do. Also, resources is a great thing to do. I know it's not like the most exciting, but if you have resources that you can share, people can tap into that themselves at their own time. And then I think the second thing you said is case studies. So often like people won't feel that they can do something until they see an example of someone who is similar to their, has started a startup in the same field, the same area, comes from a similar background. And then you can kind of offer them either to connect and to learn from each other, or just even offering them as a case study. That's a really big thing as well, that we see that a lot of people don't feel like they feel like, oh, okay, this person actually did a similar thing to me. I can see a pathway to growing my business or to integrating these aspects into my business. So I think that's also a nice way to engage them, if that makes sense. Yeah. We're conscious of time. So I'm just going to check the chat and make sure if there's any other questions. Nope, I think, people are sharing their LinkedIn's amazing. I'm going to keep going, but any other thoughts and chats, please pop them in the chat there. But yeah, great to hear from both of you from your different contexts as well that you're working in. So for a final area, communications and marketing. As I mentioned before, obviously, the way that you communicate and advertise your product, your service, your program is a really big thing that's people want to see themselves reflected. This is also shown in kind of research that, yeah, people, especially young people, want to see themselves reflected in the brands that they're putting their money into, and also to the kind of services that they're taking on. So this is a really important way to think about how you build your brand as a startup, but also as a program offering these services. I want to give an example of what not to do and what not to have as a kind of embedding inclusivity. This was from a few years ago, but BIC, which is a big pen make, created a marketing campaign around pens for her, which included kind of a pen that was pink and purple and fit in a certain way, and had a lot of backlash where people were like, can women not write with normal pens and have it be accepted? And there was a lot of kind of stuff on social media kind of backlashing to that, and obviously just wasn't necessary, and didn't really think about the end user and why they would take a product like this. And then if you compare this, for those who are kind of maybe into beauty, will know that Rihanna, alongside making her music, has launched a very, very successful beauty brand. And one of the ways it's been successful is that it offers a lot more diversity in terms of the actual skin tones that it caters for, and this is something that's a real problem in the fashion, in the kind of beauty industry, that there isn't enough diversity in terms of the products. There obviously are products doing this, but they're not advertising and kind of communicating about it this way. So they also really lent into the campaign by showing a diverse range of models, different ethnicity, size, gender, different things. And this is hugely successful and continues to be to this day. So what are ways that you can actually be inclusive in your marketing campaigns? Obviously, a big one is just like actually representing and showing people in your campaigns that are diverse. One of the things we do want to slightly avoid is any tokenism. So if you have one woman in your programs, don't be rolling them out for every social media post or every approach, but actually, thinking about how you can showcase those you're working with and highlight those in your programs, using case studies, for example, on your LinkedIn or on your website to kind of bring in different groups. Using inclusive language, obviously this will really differ depending on the country and the context you're in, but just think about how you can maybe add this into your style guide. So often if you're talking about people with neurodiversity, or you're talking about people with disability, you use the word people at the start in English. It's just a bit of a nicer way to use it. So often looking at, I don't know, community groups or charities that work with these groups, you can find the best language to use, and integrating that into your style guide is a good way to make it kind of a process or habit. Avoiding stereotypes of people. So for example, if you, I don't know, maybe if you are working with rural communities, maybe they all don't want to be stereotyped as a certain way, as just if they're working on a farm or different things like as we mentioned, there's innovation in all pockets of the area. So how do you showcase that and not lean into kind of the stereotypes? And similarly, another thing is to think about if you're working with freelancers or agencies, those who are doing design work for you, running events, working on your branding, how can they be also diverse in the kind of people that you bring in to work on these campaigns. And then for running events, so as I mentioned before, obviously if you're running any events, you want to make sure that they are accessible for those in wheelchairs, or make sure there's ramps or access through a lift area. Also think about if you're offering kind of for maybe new mums coming back to work, if there's any breastfeeding or pumping areas that they may need to use. Childcare is another big one. It's not something that's often you're able to do into budgets and stuff, but if you did, then yeah, that's an incredible one to bring in working parents. And also think about your venue. Is it accessible by public transport? Is the area that you're asking people to come to safe? Are people going to have to walk really far in the dark after an event? Different things like that. Content considerations, again, diverse speakers, having them represented, thinking about live translation. As I mentioned, there's lots of AI software and different approaches that can be used and utilized in this area. It's really growing and broadening, so that's great. Thinking about the language you're using, if you're coming from an academic or technical background, trying to really move away from jargon. Those from Climate-KIC on the call will know that at our last all staff meeting, I had a bell the whole time and rang this bell if our CEO used any jargon, which was very fun, a little bike bell, which made her slightly terrified, I think, of doing any speeches or anyone else. But it was a really great way, and it was probably one of the best speeches she gave with less jargon in it. So it's kind of a fun way, also giving participants, though, that kind of tool to have is a nice way to kind of break down barriers and have them feel empowered to ask questions when we use language that isn't accessible. And again, kind of smaller breakout groups, as I mentioned, we were talking about kind of people with neurodiversity or different learning needs. They may not feel comfortable speaking in a big group. So how can you offer them a chance to learn and share in smaller groups, and having those, thinking about their the comfort they have in different approaches. And then finally, online events. So if you're offering across different time zones, making sure that this is maybe for someone like us who offer worldwide kind of events, but we often offer 2 time zones for different trainings so that we cover kind of different aspects of the world. But you could also think about that in terms of getting more participants, some who might be able to join during the day or some who might be able to join in the evening. Dial-in options, so having kind of an option to join via call is always a good one. And then also asking in your online registration if anyone has any needs that you can kind of add into. So that's also a way to know who's in the room and how you can cater to them. I've included a resource that we have, which is an event checklist that you can check out afterwards for running events, and it's a template you can take and use. I'm going to skip this just because we're running a little bit low on time, and I just wanted to keep going. But again, I'll pause after this little bit to look at the chat. But I wanted to just highlight that, as I mentioned, we are seeing a little bit of movement in the investor space, particularly when it comes to gender equality and startups that kind of embed gender from the get-go. And this is a criteria called the 2X criteria, which is a kind of global standard that a lot of the investment community have signed up to, that they will invest in companies that meet these requirements. So it includes basic kind of 2X ESG kind of standards that they have, but then it has these kind of 6 areas on the right-hand side. And the startup that you're working with, or the company or SME you're working with, has to meet at least one of them, and then also provide a time-bound commitment to meeting an additional criteria. And what's really useful is that on their website, I've included a link, they have a kind of a tool that you can go in and say, okay, I'm in X country, I'm in Italy, for example, I'm working in the agricultural sector. It gives you the different kind of basic ESG requirements you need, and you can say, okay, I meet this, and then it also gives you the extra areas as well. And at the end of it, it'll tell you whether you meet the 2X criteria or whether the areas you need to work on. So it's quite useful to also give to your startups to see whether they're part of this. And it's worth also to look at the members of the 2X community to see which investment funds are signed up to this, because they will only invest in businesses that have met this requirement. I wanted to just highlight, I created a list of some investors in Europe that are looking specifically at targeting women-founded startups or from underrepresented backgrounds. So I linked all of them so you can have a little look, and maybe it's something you want to pass on to your startups there. And then I just wanted to quickly, we don't have a huge amount of time, but I just wanted to quickly touch on that obviously once you have all these actions and these ideas of how you can embed this in your organization, you want to also turn these ideas into action. And one of the ways you can do this is creating a kind of action plan. I have a template on the next slide, on this one, sorry. And I've created a link to it as well, so you can go back and have a look at that and think about filling it in. But just wanted to give some top tips around, okay, when you're thinking about these intervention areas and you're thinking about percentages or targets, some ways you can go beyond the sort of basic approach. So thinking about hiring and retaining a diverse team, yeah, of course, you can track the percentage of women in your company, but are you also thinking about the women at different levels of leadership and tracking that as well, and maybe having goals to uplift them that way? Strengthening products and services. Again, you can also do a percentage of those who test your products, but how can you broaden that out to have qualitative feedback that is really a little bit more, gives you more of a flavor of some of the things you could work on or tailor it that way. And also similarly with your marketing, if you're trying to target young people, how do you actually test some of that marketing and communications, get some feedback on that, or look at some of the comments that could actually really tailor your content to actually reach those groups. And I think I'll keep going on this one. So yeah, as I mentioned, there's a template which I've linked in here that goes to a Google Doc. I'll share this afterwards in an email, but you're welcome to fill this in for your own organization or the own program you're working on. And I'm happy to give tailored feedback to this if you send it across to me. So I will add this in an email and maybe we can have more of a discussion about your particular context you're working in, the groups you're working with, or the country you're working in, just to be a bit more helpful. And then I wanted to also highlight that we have a few other resources to explore. Oh, sorry, I forgot to link one of those, but I'll add them in again in the email. So we originally built this program of work out through a handbook for startups, which focuses on gender equality and also for entrepreneurship support organizations. And we have those two resources available in English, Spanish, and French. We also have an inclusive program design kind of training or resource as well that I can share, and an inclusive climate innovation toolkit that includes those event checklists, communications checklists, different kind of really bite-sized approaches to this. So I'll share everything afterwards that you can do some reading. And that's it. I wanted to pause then. I know we've got a couple of things in the chat, so let me check.
Just as you go through the question, if you can scan the QR code so we can run the feedback survey at the same time, please, because we have only 4 minutes left and it's a bit long. So of course we can take questions, no problem, but that would be good to do the survey in the background at the same time.
Yeah.
I will put the link in the chat as well if you prefer to do it on your desktop. Thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I saw people asking for links. I will send everything in an email, so don't worry about that. Everything will get sent afterwards, so you can check them. And then, interesting. Adriana saying there was a big major controversy over 2 children's activity books. Yeah, one, but the exercises were more difficult for the boys. Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. Yeah. Any other thoughts or things anyone would like to share before we finish? Great. Well, as Marlene said, if you can spend some time just giving some feedback, as you mentioned, that's so important to iterate and make things better for the next group. But just wanted to say thank you to everyone for their contributions. Yeah, really great to hear that you're kind of thinking about this, particularly with the programs you're working with and how you can, motivate the startups to feel interested in this area. As I mentioned, the biggest thing I always say to them is if you do this upfront and integrate it into your processes, it saves you time, money, effort in the long run. And it really can, those small changes can really make a difference to building businesses that are diverse and equal and actually creative and offer better solutions. So I want to say good luck to everyone for trying to kind of working on this area. We'll follow up with a lot of resources and different things. And I'm always around if you need any support or help, even if it's 8 years down the line, as someone mentioned. We're always around and very happy to chat about your specific area that you're working in. So yeah, thank you. If I can, is the Menti working, Marlene? Are we...
Yeah, it's working. It's just that I think maybe Marina, because I'm waiting for people to reply to the question before changing the slides. Maybe you already replied. That's why.
Got it.
But we'll try to go a little bit quicker. Yeah. So right now, for example, people are going quicker, so I can change. But yeah, thank you so much, Wallis, for the session. Super insightful, lots of participation. So I think it's been appreciated. I will just stay a little bit longer to get the feedback, but feel